we're looking at examples of collections. And so I'm going to create a new, oops, I want it to be a sub-package of this. I'm going to call it collections, because ArrayList is part of a larger set of classes that are together are called collections, because they're collections of things you can do. So, but we just want to test ArrayList. Okay, so let's see an example of this. So if you remember, okay, so we'd find an array list, and it's going to contain strings. And okay, now it's complaining. It says symbol array list, it can't find. And what do you do with that? You can either click on this and add the import. And we see that ArrayList is part of the java.util package. Okay, so and if you want to be absolutely clear, like sometimes if you're particularly for instance variables where you declare them in one place and instantiate them in another place, that's the preferred way of doing things. Sometimes it may not be, if you want to make it absolutely clear what it is that's going to be in there, because these could be separated by a bit of code, then it can be helpful to actually keep it in there, but you don't have to. All right, so let's add some names to it again. Okay, so again, notice that I didn't have to say how big it was, although actually there is the constructor is actually overloaded. So I can actually add, this can be useful, although this one is not. This kind of harkens back to the days where, supposing I have an idea about how much I'm going to put in here, I can actually specify that. I never use that because in the old days when memory was much more constrained, that could be useful because I wanted to squeeze every last byte out. In these days I don't. This is actually a little bit more useful. Now the syntax of this is a little bit strange, and to understand the syntax you need to understand how Java does generics, which we're not going to worry about for right now. But the bottom line, and maybe I'll show this in a second, is that I can, if I instantiate this array list and I give it another array list, because that's the only thing we have right now, it will copy all of those elements into the new one. So that can be a very useful way of doing things. And in fact, if you remember, for getter methods for an array, we always cloned it. Otherwise, somebody who would get a reference to our array could actually change our instance variable on the inside. Now, if I have an instance variable that's an array list, I will want to not return the array list itself, but return a copy. Now, they do have a clone method, but it doesn't work as well, and so it's best to just instantiate a new one. So we'll talk about that. Anyway, well, now unlike arrays, this because it has a nice toString method to override. As long as okay, because it overrides the toString, it does what arrays should have done with their toString. Namely, what it does is it prints out what I had here. So that's nicer than arrays. The other thing is that the way that arrays behave, and different collections are going to behave differently, is that if I add something to the end, then it will, if I add something, it adds it to the end. Okay, so what are some of the other things? If you remember, there was this size. So what is the size? The size is how many elements there are. And it also, if I want to get the third, in this case the third index, not the third element, index 3, which is the fourth element. And if I try to, just like arrays, if I try to get something that's not there, then it gives me, in this case, index out of bounds exception. And it says index 4 out of bounds for length 4. And again, if you're reading this with any bit of, if you haven't been kind of preconditioned to know about zero-based indexing, this message in and of itself, it actually makes very little sense. It only makes sense if you've kind of twisted your brain into this zero-based indexing stuff, which unfortunately we have to do. But okay, index out of bounds, index 4 out of bounds for length 4. Say, what? I got 4 things, give me the 4th thing. And you say, no, that's out of bounds. You say, what? So just be, you've heard me rant about this a lot, but that's what happens. Okay, so let's go. All right, now, now this is one of the nice. Oops, not. Sometimes the auto completion is not so. See, notice I can define it to be object, but that's not as useful as I want. So if I want to create a copy, it helps if I okay. So now I have a copy. And see, now I can do things with a copy. Now, actually, one of the things I can do is I can also remove something at a particular index. So let's remove the 0th index. Okay, so what's happened? I've removed the one at the 0th index, and now everybody shifts to the right. And in general, whenever if you remove something, then then again everybody shifts. I can also remove a particular item if I happen to know what it is. All right, so if I happen to believe that that's in there, I can actually remove it, and now it looks like this. So it went in there and grabbed the particular one that I had. Okay, so but the original one is untouched. If I look at the original one, I have not done a thing to it, and they're all still there. Okay, so that's there are the strings. So, but now let's let's say I wanted to put doubles in. Let's put some random doubles in. Oops, let's fix the imports for that. And then well, let's put 10. Okay, so let's put Gaussians in, what the heck. Okay, so now I put, this next Gaussian, what does it return? It returns, notice I'm putting in primitive doubles, but it's not complaining, it's auto-boxing them for me. Okay, so these are the values. And supposing I wanted to do something with them, let's add them up. And now I can use the for each. Okay, so this is the for each. Now notice I can actually use the auto boxing in the for each, or I can do it this way, and it'll auto here. It will actually remove the double capital D, but then auto box it when I try to add it to sum, or I can here it's now auto boxing it when it pulls it out, and it's just kind of adding it there. So. Okay, so and just to print just the, all right, so again, notice what here I'm using the for each and I'm auto boxing it in the value. Again, I could have done it the other way, but again, notice it's nobody's complaining, even though the object, what's happening is, it says, give me the next one. It comes out as a capital D double, but it says, see, you're putting it into a variable that's a type double, and I will do that. And so now I can actually get the mean. And even though the theoretical mean is supposed to be 0, so I tell you, instead of printing all these, let's just do a whole boatload. How many? So only 10. Let's do a bunch more, but not print them all out. And we see that the mean is actually closer to 0, which is what it should be for a Gaussian of mean 0. Okay, so again, to recap, we define an array list with these little funny angle brackets that tells us what we're going to put into it. We instantiate it, and we can either repeat what we're going to put into it, or we can leave it off, depending on which is more clear. We put things into it by adding, When we print it, it actually prints what's in there instead of the gobbledygook that the arrays actually do. We can find out how many are in there. We can get a particular index, understanding the off by 0 thing, off by 1. So if we try to get something which is how many we're in, it'll give us this weird thing, which and again, guaranteed if you're, regardless of what, every modern language has this off by 0. So if you're doing programming, whether it's in Java, Python, JavaScript, whatever, at some point the off by 1 will bite you if it hasn't already. And if it has already, it will bite you again, and again, and again. Guaranteed. But we have no choice. So I can also create a new one by putting in the old one, and that copy is something that I can manipulate without changing the original. That's what we want to use for getters and setters, because as you can see here, I manipulated the copy but did not affect the original one. And then finally, auto boxing. I gave you an example here for creating an array list containing doubles. Here I use the diamond instantiation thing because I stuffed a bunch of double primitives in, and it auto-boxed them to capital D doubles. And then here I took them out, and it auto-boxed them, taking them out from a capital D double, put them into a double primitive, and then I was able to manipulate it. Okay, so that's array lists. And then now the next topic is going to be in the next chapter, where we're going to talk about one of the, or at least one of them. We're not going to do lambda expressions, but we're going to talk about interfaces.